your board, and I think you should be able to see my screen on your screen with the title page, and just give it a couple of minutes for others to arrive and we'll get cracking. Okay, it's about 12:30. There are one or two issues, it looks like, with technology, as ever. I hope you can see a screen that just says welcome to dates, deadlines and presentation. And that's our kind of starting point really for the session. John, I think, is here with me, and Janet also is here, and indeed is Steve, so that's great. So we have a full team, and it looks like just on my screen now I've got John paused and Steve blank. So I'm going to suggest we don't use there's Steve. Okay. I'm not going to put my camera on because at the moment, for some reasons, on my screen, Steve and John are filling up where the presentations are. So I don't know what causes that, but if that's happening to you also, then we'll need to take account of that, and Steve just did. So, okay, welcome to this discussion item. And I guess the context for this is moving forward into the new academic year. And particularly some questions that were raised. Morning, David, who's just arrived. Afternoon, I should say. Some questions that were raised at the Hallam meeting. What I'm going to suggest we do is to see these questions that people came up with that Steve recorded, so thanks to Steve for that, as really a start of the 10. It's some questions, it's not all questions, and what we thought we would do is to do two things really. One is to recognise that this is a bit of an incomplete list, and that you will be able to add to this either in conversation at a later point, or by adding items to the chat window. So there'll be, in a sense, two chunks. Nikki is joining us too. Welcome, Nikki. Okay, Alison, no sound for you. Are other people getting sound? Oh, God. Okay. Kath's got sound, and David's got sound. Steve's got sound. Yeah, okay. Teresa and Alison. There may be something about the settings that you have operating them on your machine, if I can say, if it's at all helpful, that this is being recorded and will make it available. So if there are glitches in the moment, then what we will do is to make sure that you can access the recording. If you go to your audio settings, though, which is on the top of the menu section that you should have on your screen, and press show this tab, you should be able to check the audio that you're getting. There's a sound check facility on that. So if you can do that in the first instance, that would be great. Okay, so we had half a dozen questions, and those are the questions that we're going to get started with. Deadlines and dates people were wanting to pick up. And so what we want to do to start with is to remind colleagues to of the original indicative time frame for submission that we shared with you a little while back in the webinar. Most people have tackled the first two assessment tasks. That's not meant to frighten the people that haven't. And what we'd set out in this framework is an outline which would enable people to progress with a view of submission by the end of the calendar year, which is that final submission date. Two things about that, I think. One is that it's an indicative time frame, and there's some gaps between the dates to give you the chance to catch up or maybe elongate the process a little bit. We're aware, though, that some things will not fit into neat chunks, particularly work with students and staff, which is at the core of this piece of activity. So late submissions are allowable, but what we're not wanting to do, I think if we can avoid it, is to have things drifting too far, because our experience is at some point things don't just slow down, they stop. So that's the context that we're working to currently. If that creates issues for you or you want to come back on it, write some things in the chat or hang on until we unmute the microphones and we can have some conversation about it. But if you want to put things down in the chat at the moment and as a marker, then we're happy to take those. Hopefully, though, this will help you to plan what you're doing and to ensure that you're at least in sight of the target dates. Those haven't changed since earlier on, by the way. In terms of other questions, there was a question about, which we had on the original one, which was about collaboration. Collaboration with colleagues. The issue particularly was about some guidance about how to recognize collaboration, work with others, and how much is appropriate. And I think with a bit of luck we should be able to unmute Steve's microphone, and Steve, you'll be able to say a bit about this focus on collaboration, and I'll just mute mine for a little while if that's okay with colleagues.
Thanks, Rob. Can people hear me all right, first of all?
Yes, that's fine, Steve, thanks.
Good. Okay, so a couple of things about being collaborative. There's a reference I will email, which was a lovely book by Peter Kahn and Lorraine Walsh as well. She's now Lorraine Anderson, on collaborative learning, which unpacks a lot of this. But very briefly, in order to submit where there's been collaborative working, my suggestion is first of all to describe what the collaboration was, and then on reflecting about the collaboration, what the benefits of collaboration were for yourself and for your students, and also if you wanted for your colleagues, what were the challenges in doing the collaboration, and then in order to ensure that it fits with the brief, to talk about your particular contribution. What was it that you did, and what was the result? What particular impact did your bit have? And hopefully there might be some reflections on the reflections about how difficult it is to tease that out. And that's my bit on being collaborative.
Thanks, Steve. So there'll be some information. John's added some text into the chat box related to the timeline. Just two things there, I think. One is that notion of getting things done in mid-November, particularly if what people want to talk about it. My sense is that people are doing stuff, sending it in, and then it's getting tweaked and it's getting looked at. So if you want that formative dimension, that's a helpful notion to think about, making sure there's time in the program for that. I don't know, we've just lost Janet. Janet has had to go to PhD Viva meeting, and I was going to suggest that she just talk to us about the next bit, which was about the work focus in the portfolio. I'll do a little bit of that, but if John or Steve want to come in, that would be helpful. So what I've done here is two things. One is just to confirm that actually the materials, including the portfolio pages, are now in a new location which is accessible via that link, and that's part of the process we're developing to curate those materials and further develop them. So if you want those and go to the CRA site, you won't find them there currently. You'll find them now via that link, and you should all have a copy of that in an email that I sent out about an hour ago. In terms of the that set of tasks that John was talking about, the doing task 3 to 6, what we're after then is 4 accounts of activities, 500 words each, 2 of which relate directly to work with students individually or in groups. And what you'll find on the portfolio pages is really quite an open structure for reporting on that with some guidance. So that's the fairly open rubric, if you like, which we would encourage you to follow, because it has both a descriptive element and the opportunity for some reflective work. And we've literally given you the opportunity to fill in the boxes. That's what we're looking for you to do, no more, no less. And you can do that by creating templates within PebblePad or another system. And David, I think, has used PebblePad, and if he's got access to a microphone, you might want to just talk about that a little bit, so you can do something similar if you have PebblePad. Or what most people have done so far is to use a Word document. Simply take the format, paste it into a Word document, which is easy to do, and send it in to us. And the similar model fits with the institutional too. What happened, how it went, and again, if theory, as and when theory fits in, then making reference to that too. So there's more than just a statement of what you did in relation to those elements. John added a bit about collaboration and also how to address the award outcomes. Absolutely, absolutely. So, John, I don't know whether you've got access to a mic and you want to say anything about these elements. And see, similarly with Steve, I'll just turn my mic off now so that others can come in, or people can write stuff in the chat window if that would be useful.
folks. John here. Hope you can hear. Yes, I was typing things into chat and I'm therefore arriving 30 seconds after Rob has moved the slides on each time. Sorry about that. But I hope it's helpful towards what we're talking about. These the portfolio elements here that we've developed are really to give you a structure if you want one. So it's up to you really to what extent you want to rely on them and use them. They may be helpful, they may not. Some people prefer a blank piece of paper when they're writing reflections, some people prefer a heavy structure. This is an attempt at something in between that will be useful to you in order just to get a sense of the sort of thing that we might be looking for. And that might be me be over and out. Oh, I've got a question here. Yes, so that's yeah, a reference. Peter Kahn and Lorraine Walsh's work, collaborative working in higher education. I think it might have been Steve who suggested that. But yeah, I think the key point about collaboration is, I would imagine that for most of us in doing this, or at least for many of us in doing this, there is going to be some collaboration involved, sometimes some very heavy collaboration involved. And we would want to encourage that and to see that as an important part of getting things done in terms of developing practice around personal tutoring and academic advising. But obviously some of the limitations of that apply when then putting that in for formal recognition of your work, which is the need to be clear about what your part was in it, just briefly, and to say a little bit about what you think the benefits of the collaboration were and what you and the students got out of it and what you learned from it. And I think, yes, the Kahn and Walsh is helpful in terms of framing that, perhaps, and helping you explain it and relate it to some literature. Rob still has control of the slide, so if Teresa's asking to go back to the first slide, I don't know what you. I'll let Rob take over again, I think.
Thanks, John. I think that's the slide that Teresa was wanting to see. Yeah. And so we've done a little bit on deadlines. We've done something around the issues associated with collaboration, thanks Teresa, and how that's recognised in submissions. And again, these are starters for 10. You may well want to talk with your mentor, whether it's an institutional CRA person. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour about the sorts of things that are important. There are no, I think it's important to say, there are no hard and fast rules, as John said. It's up to individuals to find ways of representing their work, but what we're trying to do is to frame some possibilities in offering the structure. Translating my work and focus into the portfolio, in one sense we've done a nuts and bolts bit about that. So if I just walk through, the slides again, that's the sort of translation in a nuts and bolts kind of way. I'm just wondering whether colleagues who were thinking about that area, that notion of translating your work and focus into the portfolio, whether there are questions that we haven't picked up around that that are important for you to raise now, or whether it was a nuts and bolts question that Steve picked up. So please, if you have access to a microphone, unmute it and tell us, or write something in the chat. The worst thing will be we finish this call, you haven't got what you want selected and we don't know. So now's a chance just to say either that's all, but, or what I really meant was. Silence will probably be indicated as assent that you have 100% of what you need. So I'll shut up for 30 seconds and people can write in the chat or speak to us. Thanks. Okay, that's your 30 seconds. Folks, hope you can still hear me. John or Steve, do you want to say anything else about the translation of work and focus into the portfolio?
I could add a little bit, I think. After 15 or so years of assessing portfolios, I would say that the key issue is to translate the individual tasks you've done. I've got the checklist open in front of me here, the portfolio checklist. So in effect, you'll have gone through the core outcomes of the course by what you have done, because that asks you to identify your development goals, plan to do something, and review it. But just by taking part in the course and developing the materials for the portfolio, you'll have met the core outcomes of the program, hopefully. So the key things to think about in terms of writing up the reflective commentary is to talk about how you have met the specialist outcomes of the module and how they are informed by the values of the module. I'm calling it module now for shorthand. So what have you learned through the process of reviewing practice, planning an intervention, doing some work about the nature and limits? So outcome one is about the nature and limits of personal or academic tutoring. What have you learned about supporting individual students as a result of what you've done over the course of the course? So that's outcome two. Outcome three is can you draw out examples of the application of tutoring skills in working with students over the course of the program? Have you identified, outcome four, ways in which, so you can work through them in this way in that final reflective commentary and spend a couple of 100 words on each if that suits you, just talking about, well, each of them in turn and how they're informed by your professional values and what you've learned from the tasks that you've undertaken in the course of this piece of study. I don't know whether that helps.
Thanks, John. Can I add to that? And something that I think also might be useful will be to think about the Argyris double loop learning, which is having written something and read it, what new insights do you get having read it again? So it's reflections on the reflections. Does that make sense?
Just to me, thanks, Steve. And I think it's very helpful from what John said, just to remind colleagues that I've only given you the doing bit here on this slide, but there are, of course, the rubric for the final task, which you can download and look at, and there's also that self-assessment checklist. And we designed that really so that you would make our life easier, and maybe your life easier too, in the sense that we're giving you the chance to make sure the material you need for the award is present and visible and accessible in your portfolio. And our experience, I think, a little bit has been that's an important thing to do, because it ensures we're not coming back to you for a material that we think might be there but we can't quite discern, and that you've done the job that you need to do in terms of making sure you're meeting the requirements of the award. Because the aim is professional development. It's not getting to that point and saying to you, well, actually, this isn't quite what we had in mind. So I think the notion of having a look at that checklist sooner rather than later, and having it somewhere in the back of your thinking when you're writing up both the doing element and the presenting element, I think is a really helpful one. Okay. And then there's a couple of other questions that came up. So one was around the case studies having to relate directly to the goals, and I think the answer to that is that it depends on, if they're your goals, I would say yes, they need to relate to the goals, but bear in mind the potential for unanticipated learning and unanticipated outcomes, and clearly they need to relate to the outcomes of the award, and those are present in that checklist that John just talked about. So my answer to that question is yes, they have to relate. They don't have to be 100% match, but they have to relate, and we need to be able to trace through a degree of coherence in the portfolio. But again, I'll just shut up, and Steve and John might want to comment on that, and then I can tell you about my retirement, which was the last bit.
I'll say it again because I forgot to unmute my mic. Rob, I don't think there's anything I can add.
Okay, thanks, Steve. John, do you want to add anything to that? You're muted currently, if you can hear us. And puts them into the text, yeah? Okay.
Yes, I put it in the text.
You did, thanks.
Sorry.
Thanks very much, just found it, yeah. So people just note that in a sense, I think we're speaking from the same hymn sheet on that, in the sense that it's a yes and kind of response. They do have to relate, and there may be elements that come in because at the end of the day there is that sense of all sorts of unanticipated things will happen. Okay, the other thing I was going to say, and I hope it's helpful, is yes, it is my plan to retire, and as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I can see, that's not going to affect the mentoring work that's currently being done by me, or will continue to be done by me, in relation to this cohort. So there's nothing going to be affected in that sense. Keep sending me stuff, and I'll keep talking to people. That's my bit of it, I think. And now, a bit where maybe we give you the chance to say that's all very well, but, or what about this, or whatever else you need to say to us. We'll hopefully see some people at the University of Central Lancashire, indeed doing colleagues who are offering contributions in that event. I hope we've made that as accessible as possible for colleagues in terms of cost, and I hope that that encourages people to come along and get a chance to talk to people that way. But if there are issues now that we haven't addressed that you really need us to, and John's already put one of those questions in the box, which is, goes back to the time frame issue, which is how's it going? How feasible for you is that sense of the January deadline? And Harpreet's already given us an answer to that. That's a brilliant time management strategy by the look of it. But I'll shut up and let people either add bits in the chat in response to John's question, or maybe if you have a microphone, you can come in and just give us your two penneth about the deadlines issue, but also other issues and questions that you want to raise with us. So I'll shut up for a bit.
Okay, I think it's interesting that the comments so far, I think if Harper manages to keep an afternoon a week free for this, that'll be remarkable and would be a good basis for getting it finished. Teresa, and I think David have said that they're doing the work. The issue is finding the time to write it up by the sound of it. Which I think is an experience we can all associate with. Alison's just reminding me I need to give some feedback, which is perfectly reasonable. Yes, I'll have to get on that, Alison, sorry.
Nikki looks like he's asking for a nudge.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue there is it is very busy at the moment, and the question is it going to get any less busy to be able to make those strides or set a bit of time aside to do the writing up? Yeah.
Okay.
And now Karen's making us all feel guilty that we're eating into her weekends.
Okay. I think two things really. I mean, I take thanks, Nikki, for giving us a sort of permission to do mutual nagging. That sounds like a good strategy to me. So we'll be doing our bit of that, and if we're causing a problem, you just tell us to go away in a nice phrase or two. Janice has got some concerns about what's happened in the institutional context by the look of it. The work's gone on, but the writing and reflection is still to do. And I mean, all we can say, I think, about that is, as John's articulated, we appreciate that there's never a quiet time, and our job is to work with you to help you make as much success of this as you can and get as much out of it as you can. So if there are issues in terms of the risk of falling behind on the indicative timetable, the line indicative, then please talk to us, because our job is not to rescue you, but it is to make sure that inappropriate obstacles are not put in your way. So if we can do something to help with that, then we will. Yeah.
I think the other thing to say about people who I would be concerned if people hadn't done anything yet. I'm a lot less concerned if people are saying they've done things, but they just haven't had the chance to write it up. And I think that there's still room to catch up with those things. In fact, in terms of the timescale we set out, you're not behind, because we've only said those doing tasks would be completed by the middle of November. The slight concern for me would always be that we're not actually in the first draft of writing up a reflection on doing something. It's just a case of trying to capture quite raw sometimes how it felt, and if there were any issues for you to use, as Steve has said, as maybe a basis of reflecting at greater leisure and with greater detachment a little later on. So it might be worth just trying to just scribble anything down, even something on a post-it note or something that acts as a capture of a particular event, intervention or activity that you've done, as close to it as possible, as a basis then for writing maybe a more academic style reflection, a little more removed from it.
Okay, another, yeah, I'd agree with that too. If you can capture some stuff almost on the back of an envelope, then the rawness is actually worth having because it brings that immediacy back into your mind when you come to do that reflective writing. How much we should be referring to the literature? John or Steve, do you want to say anything about that? Janice's question.
Well, I think that's an issue for the particularly for the final task, the final review process, because I think in that, I think you are being asked, because one of the values is that your practice is scholarly and evidence-based. So certainly in that, you're being asked to link what you have done back to the literature in some way. The individual reflections and notes of tasks may or may not make that link. I mean, it very much depends on what it was you did. And hopefully, though hopefully they were, as part of the planning process, there was some element of you looking at the literature and thinking, well, the literature suggests this might be a worthwhile thing to do. So there may be an element of your planning that is saying, well, this is suggested in the literature, I'm going to try it out, we'll find out if it works. And then in the final review, you're looking back and in a sense, testing. You're doing a piece of action research, aren't you? You're testing out whether what the literature is recommending works in your setting. And that may be one way of thinking about it, working as a model.
John, can I add to that, for those colleagues who might be concerned about the tension between, on the one hand, being evidence informed and writing a scholarly piece, and on the other hand they're talking about themselves, which is always a difficult thing to do as an academic, then there is a bridging literature on biography, autobiography as a research method, which they would find useful if that's a tension that they're having. There's a lovely piece of work done by Ken Plummer on secondary sources, which talks about talking about oneself. Happy to talk about that with anybody if they want to, but it does get over the barrier of I'm talking about myself and saying how good I am. How does that make me scholarly?
Steve, if there's a reference for that, we could perhaps send that around later on with a link to the recording.
As we speak, I'm looking for it on my shelves here. Yeah.
Okay, so what we'll do when we've finished the conversation, colleagues, is we'll upload this recording. We'll send everybody in the group a link to it so you can come back to it. But as part of that, Kath, if you can make sure that Steve's reference is included, then people will have access to that. Okay, and that also, I think John's point draws our attention to the importance of not simply repeating stuff. So if the literature is not very present in the doing, that's fine if it comes up in the final interpretive statement, but we don't really want to encourage a kind of cut and paste job so that bits of portfolio keep appearing in different sections. Okay. Journal reflective practice, John is picking up as well. Okay, other questions or issues or concerns that people just want to flag at this point, given that hopefully one of the things this will do is to galvanize, catalyze, facilitate, encourage a conversation with mentors where that's appropriate. I'll turn my mic off again and people can write or speak the sorts of things that are in their minds at this stage. Okay. Well, the the plausible inference from the lack of comments, people are now 100% satisfied. Probably not true. We've probably gone as far as we can, unless there are final issues that people want to raise. I hope that's to a certain extent been helpful and maybe a little bit reassuring in terms of our expectations, and that particularly November is a kind of staging post in the process. So it's not about getting everything done at that point. It is about getting to a point where you can share material, get feedback on material, and progress to that final element. Anything else from colleagues now? If they have access to microphones, that's great. Otherwise, in the chat window. That's great, Harpreet, thank you. David also. Steve has found the reference, and we'll try and find the URL for that. That's great. Okay, in that case, it's okay, a bit from Karen here. Thank you, Karen. Yeah. Yes, I think that's an appropriate way of taking things forwards, and Steve has confirmed it. Okay, thank you, colleagues, for giving up a chunk of time at lunchtime, 40 minutes or so. We look forward to continuing dialogue, I guess, and as I said before, hope to see some of you, at least at the University of South Lancashire, at the end of the month. Yep, as Steve said, echo that, have a good weekend, and hopefully not too busy a weekend too.